Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. I'm joined, as per usual, by my co-host, Gadi Taub. Hey, Gadi.
Hi, how are you in these depressing times?
Well, I'm depressed and not sleeping well at nights, but aside from that, everything's great. Do you want to talk about what's happening?
Do you two wake up and say, Naftali Bennett, Prime Minister of Israel? Ah! That happens to me at night.
No, actually, the problem is that I think about it before I'm trying to fall asleep, and then I can't fall asleep because the whole situation is like just living inside of a horror movie that you don't know how you ever entered into it, and you can't get out.
I don't think there is a precedent to that in democracy, that someone with 5% support in the population, which has now evaporated because he betrayed them. So he has 1% support maybe, which is, as Irit Linur, this witty commentator, said, which is exactly like Bashar al-Assad, only the reverse. He has 1% support in the population, or we can say he has less dwarfs than Snow White, and he is our prime minister. It's absolutely ridiculous. The system is so broken that this can happen. It's just broken.
It's broken, but it's not just that. And we also have to remember that he's not really prime minister. So the whole thing is a joke. You know, it's like they tell us this joke, which is bad enough, which is that a guy who has absolutely no public support is now our dear leader. But then it works out that he actually doesn't have any power, and the real dear leader is the guy behind the curtain, and that's Yair Lapid. And more to the point, you know, that's the head of the media party, that, as they say, you know, all of the people in the media who have been demonizing Netanyahu for the past 25 years, and that's the owner of Israel's major newspaper, Yediot Achronot, a man named Noni Moses, and you know, he's very much involved in this. And the other person who's really in charge of this government is Esther Chayut, the president of the Supreme Court, and Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General. But you know, that's already getting ahead of ourselves and our audience. I know you're like, what are you talking about, Carolyn? What are you talking about, Gadi? We don't understand. But Israel sounds like a really messed up place. And basically, at least at the outset of our discussion, all we can do is say, Israel, you have no idea how messed up this place is, because we have a prime minister who was elected by 5% of the electorate. And the vast majority of that 5% hates him now. But more to the point, it's even funnier because he got 7 members of Knesset including himself, in his little tiny party, Yamina, which is an ideologically right-wing party that's Yamina, as in to the right of Likud. So all of these people are like hardcore right-wingers. And of the 7, only one of them, Amichai Shikli, who's an awesome guy, was willing to say, wait a minute, I'm not willing to betray what I've been saying and what I stand for and what I believe in and what I ran on, thinking that I was part of a right-wing party, and so I'm not joining your government. So he actually only has 6 members of including himself, who are with him. Okay. And so what they're doing now is that they passed this law. It's called the Norwegian law, after, you know, the great democracy of Norway, which allows ministers in a government, in a parliamentary democracy, to resign from parliament and then be replaced by the next people on the list, their party list for office. And so what Naftali is now engaging in, because he wants all of his ministers to be able to resign so that they can devote themselves full-time to their important jobs in his important government and highly competent government, is that half of the people on his list don't want to be a member of his coalition. So, you know, through some extraordinary means of persuasion or another, and, you know, we can only imagine what's involved here, all of the people who oppose his government are resigning to make room for people who support his government. I wouldn't want to characterize the conversations that they're having with Naftali, but you can.
Yeah, we don't know who really is resisting and who isn't, although it seems that the next person on the list, Maimon, is resisting, but they made a
No. He announced that he was resigning from the list.
but he did not. He does not agree to the move to the left.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. By resigning,
he's not the first.
He did the exact same. He just strengthened the government.
What was who was the first to do that? It was the mayor of Sderot.
Alon Davidi.
So he was and then we knew that Naftali was heading for the left and not the right, and these people are just abdicating their moral and political duty by as we say in Hebrew, lichotz benikyon kapehem. By what would you say in English?
We're just keeping our hands clean. Of course, you're not, because by resigning, you're just as culpable for what happens as the person who supports it.
But supposedly, it wasn't your hand that held that got dirty.
It's like murder for hire. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to pay you to do it. So I'm not responsible for the person that you're killing. Like, for instance, Israeli democracy.
But they made a whole show in order to lessen the pressure on them. Two members of the list that are now in parliament, in the Knesset, made a whole show of how they have stomach aches, on how their conscience is they're liberating. They can't do it. They're thinking. And it was all a show. It was all a show, and we knew it was entirely a show because Ayelet Shaked, who at one point many believed would head the right.
She's Naftali's female doppelganger, right? I mean, they basically just go together all over the place and pretend that they're separate entities, but they're really just two heads on the same monster, where she gets to be the one with the morals and he's the bulldozer moving ahead, but they're both working hand in glove.
But what she did is she leaked to her friends in the press that she might be stopping this move in order to lessen the pressure on Naftali so he can go on with it. And as some commentators observed, she said it only off the record all the time. So she has these minions in the press who are supposedly objective journalists who became her defense lawyers in the public eye. And and the lies are just so blatant that I don't know how I think something happened with. And I think this is partly the media, and it started in America. The media has given itself a license to lie in the age of Trump. That's what happened to the American media, and ours is following suit. Although there was always this never Bibi tendency, it just becoming more and more blatant, in which it is clear to the journalists that their mission is to change their government, and that reporting news is just a means. And so they don't, if the aim is not reporting, then if reporting becomes subordinate to a political agenda, then at one point you give yourself a license to lie, which is what's going on here.
Well, I think that it actually happened under Obama. I mean, remember we had Ben Rhodes, Obama's deputy national security advisor, bragging that he created an echo chamber of the media. And he talked about the way that he manipulated the media, and he used all of these NGOs, which were all straw organizations that are all propaganda organizations for the Iran nuclear deal, and posing as experts on the issue, and then giving it to these reporters in Washington who he said are all 27-year-olds who know absolutely nothing, right? And so they were doing this, but these 27-year-olds who knew absolutely nothing knew that they liked Obama and that they wanted to do anything they possibly could to allow, Saint Obama to move forward with his crusade to realign American Middle East policy away from Israel and the Sunni Arab states and towards Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, the two most prominent supporters and engines of terrorism on the face of the planet. So they all thought that was great because Obama was doing it, and Obama is all-knowing and wonderful, and sweetness and light in all things, and a saint. So they were very willing to go forward with this, and the demonization of Trump, I think, was less. Even though everybody says, oh, it's all his fault, his terrible acerbic personality, he's such a flamboyant person, he's crazy, he's this, he's that, he's the other, it wouldn't have mattered. Trump, because of that personality, was able to beat Hillary Clinton. And I think that they took it as a crime against humanity that he dared to interrupt their party. And so that was when they sort of lost their mind, but they lost their journalistic scruples. They lost their professional ethics and destroyed the profession of journalism during Obama's administration. And the Israeli media has always been me too, I'm with you, because they want so badly to be loved by CNN and all of these really anti-Israel also reporters and editors. They gush
but
over.
Gar, I still think that although you're right that it started under Obama, it still Trump was a turning point, and the Russia hoax, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was, for me, because I argued about this here, and I saw the power of delegitimization, that they brand you with conspiracy theory, they sell you the most blatant lies, and then if you and it's a herd, and and what I noticed is that under Obama they still had a pretense of attachment to truth, but when you look at what happened to the New York Times after the Mueller report, there was a town hall with Dean, I forget his name, the editor of the
editor, Dean Banquet, Banquet, whatever the hell his name is.
And anyway, he said we found ourselves slightly flat-footed, he said, after this thing collapsed, and we need to move to something else, which is to report differently about race. And this is when they inaugurated the 1619 Project, which is an absolute lie, which is a complete manipulation of it. It has some facts, to be sure, but it's an attempt to reconfigure the narrative about America without letting the facts disturb you. So I think that we are at this stage now here too, and that the BBK, we'll talk about them later. The BB.
No, why don't we talk about it now? Because we're talking.
Sure.
Because I think it's really important. I mean,
this is our Crossfire Hurricane, right? This is what's happening here.
We're talking about, but just to sort of put it in context, we're talking about the fact that we have this government, right, that is based entirely on lies. Last week we discussed the postmodernism at the base of this government, that there's no context, that there's no past, there's no future. It's just whatever they say the truth is at any moment. It's their narrative. And by the way, their narrative is right because they're professionals and they know, and they're responsible adults. And anybody who disagrees with them is an extremist and a fascist and a BBist, which is what they call people who are members of a cult of Bibi and all of the rest of it. So we're demonized in Israel, just like the teabaggers. Remember, they called them the teabaggers, and then I think they call them the Trumpsters or whatever. It's the same kind of demonization, but none of this would be possible. This postmodern anti-democratic government, which, by the way, just suspended the operation of Knesset until they can figure out how to do it and do their job of ruling us at the same time. Did you know that? They put out a decision that nobody's allowed to submit bills to the Knesset for the next month because they just don't have the manpower to handle them. So they have just canceled democracy for the next month. That's what they did. First they stole our votes, right? They formed a government that, in the face of a clear mandate for the right, they formed a left-wing government. And we're going to talk about some of the things that they're going to start adopting very quickly right after we talk about this. But none of this would have been possible if they hadn't first produced a legal fiction, right? The case against Netanyahu that had enabled everybody to demonize him. And we had these mass rallies outside of the prime minister's residence for over the past year throughout the pandemic of these crazed, lunatic, hate-drenched left-wingers who, and by the way, it was paid for by millions and millions of dollars were invested in the crime minister anti-Netanyahu demonstrations where they were inciting for the murder of the prime minister and his family members. And they were doing all of this with the enthusiastic support and positive coverage of the media and of the legal fraternity that enabled them at the height of a pandemic when everybody was in closure for them to break closure regulations in the middle of major waves of coronavirus in Israel to have mass demonstrations against the prime minister of Israel because they called him the crime minister because he had been indicted. So Now the trial is progressing, and Gadi, you just
Ye-
had your own webcast or your own podcast about this. So why don't you tell us what's going on in Bibi's trial?
Yeah, so the first thing to say is we're dealing with three cases, and we're not talking about the single one that is serious, that is an indictment on the bribery.
Bribery.
And first of all, the bribery accusation here is itself a world precedent, because the bribe deal here, they claim, is that Netanyahu gave regulatory license to a very big telecommunication firm held by one of his friends and allies in return for positive coverage in one of the websites owned by this corporation. And it's amazing because this website was extremely hostile to Netanyahu. So it started with everyone saying that he got positive coverage, but then it clearly wasn't the case. So in the indictment, what appear actually is היענות חריגה, unusual responsiveness to Netanyahu's demands for positive coverage. And then they submitted this, and it's ridiculous on all counts, because first of all, what the regulatory license was given by all the bureaucrats, and only after that did Netanyahu sign it as a formality.
He was a rubber stamp.
So he was a rubber stamp on this, and and clearly they deserved the clearance. There was no problem there. So the whole thing stinks, because if it's a license they should have gotten anyway, so why would they pay anything for it? And then,
but it's not just that, but one thing you have to point out is that Israel's bribery statute in our criminal code does not have, it's a closed list of things, right, that can be considered bribes, and positive coverage in a newspaper or in a media website is not one of them. So the basic claim that he received bribes by allegedly receiving positive coverage from this website, Walla, it's called, and it's actually a very minor website. Nobody actually reads it, but whatever. That's not neither here nor there. Even if it were the largest website in Israel, it wouldn't matter, because under Israeli statute, just like as is the case in every single democracy on earth, right? Bribery or receiving positive coverage is not covered by the statute. So the alleged bribe that he received is not a bribe. But be that as it may, they said they're making an exception. This is going to be a precedent-setting case. It's also illegal, right? Because you can't actually do that. But let's pretend that isn't or that's just a little problem, which of course it isn't. And then we can move on to what's happening now in the trial, right? Because the trial.
Who on earth makes a legal precedent in a trial of a prime minister that you're trying to remove from power? This is outrageous.
Israel's incredibly corrupt. Legal fraternity system does. That's
yeah. So the other side of this is a unusual responsiveness to Netanyahu's demands. Now, outrageously, after this, it's worth getting into another time, because the Attorney General and the police have done multiple fouls, crimes even, in this investigation, which was opened without the proper procedure, and it's just unbelievable. And now it came to court, and the judge, one of the judges, Oded Shacham, said to the prosecution, he said, well, you're claiming that there's a forest, but you're not showing us any of the trees. Which is to say, where was this unusual responsiveness? What are the actual evidence? You're just saying this. So the Attorney General went back to work and produced a list of 315 cases of unusual responsiveness. So what happened is this is a lot to check, because now you have to make many comparisons in order to verify this. And Netanyahu has a legal team, but it's limited. So there was the people I interviewed on my podcast are a group of volunteers who call themselves the 315 Project. And they went to check each of the trees comprising this forest. And it's just unbelievable what they found. In many of the cases, there was no responsiveness at all. There was a request that was just not answered. And they're in the list. So that's out. In many other cases, they found that what appeared on Walla appeared everywhere else,
And
on all
every
the rest
other-
of the media outlets. So that's obviously not unusual responsiveness. And then they discovered, and this is the most outrageous, because if you'd write it in a comedy, you'd say, no, come on, don't be ridiculous. It turns out that they didn't compare it to the people of Walla, their responsiveness to other politicians, which when you do, it's not at all unusual. But they don't have a benchmark to compare what unusual is, because they don't know what the usual is. So the whole thing is just so completely and utterly ridiculous that had we had real journalism in the media, which we don't, real investigative journalism, in real commentary, people would be screaming bloody murder and say, cancel this trial. It's a travesty. It's a joke. But no, we have.
And just to give one example, because you probably know it too, but
no, I was going to say that the most slanderous thing, that if you want to imagine what the coverage of the Netanyahu trial is in the Israeli media, television, press, and internet, then think of the New York Times and Washington Post covering the Mueller investigation and the Crossfire Hurricane. That's how objective and honest it is.
And just to give a sense of how absurd the allegation that he received a positive coverage. So one of the examples that is in the list of 315 is that the the Prime Minister's office requested that they change a headline or something that they said was not supportive of the Prime Minister. So they looked into what that headline was and what it was. That Prime Minister Netanyahu said it was right like 2 days before the 2015 elections. He was touring the neighborhood of Har Choma, which is a neighborhood in southern Jerusalem that was established during his first tenure as premier in 1997. Okay, and Netanyahu got into a huge fight with Tony Blair, who was then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, because the British were trying to block the building of this new neighborhood in Jerusalem. And anyway, so he was at the site before the elections in 2015, and he said, I approved the building of this neighborhood in 1997. Okay. And so they had this headline in Walla that said, Netanyahu confused again, right? He says 1979 when it was really 1997. And, he like immediately had corrected himself. He said 97. But they didn't say that. They said he was confused and he couldn't remember what year he was talking about. And it was just that he had misspoken. And what was even funnier, that the guy on who was reporting this from the trial yesterday said on Channel 20 was that ahead of those same elections, Bougie Herzog, who was running against Netanyahu as head of the Labour Party, gave an interview on the main television channel, on Channel 12 now and Channel 2 then, and he said that he would protect. He misspoke. He wanted to say that I'm going to keep Jerusalem united, and instead of saying Jerusalem, he said I'm going to keep Netanyahu united. Okay. And it was this big flub, and everybody saw it. It was on primetime news, right? That he said he was going to keep Netanyahu united instead of Jerusalem. He looked like a complete idiot, and it probably cost him some support among the public. So Walla, this website, changed what he said in their headline. They said, Bougie Herzog said he's going to keep Jerusalem united. Totally ignored that he had misspoken, gave him the benefit of the doubt, wanted to make him look smart and not stupid. So Netanyahu made this mistake and immediately corrected it, and they pretended that he was... Anyway, so the fact that they ended up correcting the headline, there's a distorted, slanted headline that they had first published after Netanyahu's office asked them to. This is now in the indictment, right? As proof that Netanyahu was receiving positive coverage from Walla in exchange for regulatory favors. This is just how ridiculous the case is. And you said that this is the first of 3 indictments that are now being tried. But just to be clear, right, this is the only one where he's being charged with serious crimes, with felony crimes. The rest of them are, breach of trust or whatever, which are much more minor, and nobody would ever consider having a prime minister. In fact, Naftali Bennett said at the time, you don't remove a prime minister for accepting champagne as a gift from his friends, and champagne and cigars. Remember that? Because that's what one of the other things is about, that he accepted too many cigars and bottles of champagne from a friend of his. And so for that, he was supposed to be ousted as prime minister. So this entire thing, now that it's being adjudicated, is falling apart. And the reason, I think, is because they were using the legal proceedings against Netanyahu in the hopes that it would force him to resign, that he would try to cut a plea bargain, that he would make a deal with them, that he would resign in order to avoid all of this. And Netanyahu said, screw you. I'm not resigning. Let's go forward with this. Let's let this go on.
Astonishingly, some veteran of the Attorney General's office asked on a radio interview, when asked about, before the indictments were submitted, asked what the indictments would be, and she said, in an unguarded moment, she said, it depends if Netanyahu will resign or not. If he doesn't resign, it will probably be bribery. So they're going to fit the seriousness of the indictment to the end that they're pursuing, which is getting rid of Netanyahu.
Political end, political end that they're pursuing. And so this whole thing, just to be clear, exactly there are many things that are different about what happened to Trump in 2020 and throughout his term in office, and the way that his supporters were treated, and and what's been going on with Netanyahu, largely because our systems are very different. But the use of the legal system, the Justice Department in the case of the United States, in the FISA court, and the state prosecution here as a means to delegitimize a politician and to set the course for his removal from office based upon nothing. These are very, very clear and startling similarity, or striking similarities, as is the media echo chamber that has been, a central actor in all of this. Because you're saying if the media were doing its job, but the truth is that, of course, there are independent journalists, and even my newspaper, Israel Hayom, that has done a fairly good job covering just how obscene this entire thing is throughout. So what do? They never quote anything that's they, meaning the media establishment, the broadcast news, the radio, the other newspapers. They will never actually follow up on a story that is exculpatory or supportive of Netanyahu or critical of the legal fraternity that has been persecuting him and engaging in abusive behavior and illegal behavior. Because the other thing that's so startling about this trial is that you see just how many laws the state prosecution broke on the road to indicting Netanyahu. I mean, all of the laws of procedure, all of the laws of disclosure, all of the due diligence that they were supposed to do in vetting witnesses and in vetting evidence and going over evidence. Like you said, they denied the defense the right to see what the claims were about Netanyahu in the context of their witnesses' overall behavior, so that they couldn't even form an adequate defense. The only reason that they've gotten as far as they have is because the state prosecution is so incompetent that they accidentally gave them information that they should have had by law, but that actually showed that gave away the entire game and showed what they were doing.
So there have been in multiple issues around this trial and indictment where the prosecution is not just violated the law, but also tried deliberately to prevent, allegedly deliberately, to prevent from the defense the information that it needed. And much of this information obtained, this would have never passed muster in an American court, because we don't have a a tradition of disposing of the fruits of a poison tree. We don't. So information that the Attorney General got illegally is still introduced to court. This would have been, by American standards, this would have been thrown out of court long ago. But the thing is, Israel also is very intimate, and this fraternity, these people, most of the judges have served under the Attorney General before. So it's a system where as you said, a fraternity. They're just a cohesive social group. And the one reason I think that even though it's clear now that the case is disintegrating, they would still convict him. I hope I'm wrong, but
I think you're right.
Because
it's a 3-judge panel, and the judges were chosen by the Supreme Court President Esther Hayut. And of the 3, the one that you mentioned, Oded Shacham, is the one that's considered to be open to information, and the other 2 are based upon what people around them said about them, and also about what we know about previous statements that the Chief Justice herself made about Netanyahu. It's fairly clear that they don't care what the evidence is,
and she controls their promotion. You need to remember that she controls their promotions as judges.
The Supreme Court President.
The whole system is a hierarchic system, and so even people of the left, but are very honest people like Professor Ruth Gavizon, God rest her soul. She was a friend and a very honest jurist. She received the Israel Prize. Said on Facebook that she doesn't believe that Netanyahu has a chance to get a fair trial. And I think that if they in the end, if they exonerate him, what this means is for the whole legal system, the whole legal system put all its reputation on this case. It's collapsing now because even the judges who are part of the same fraternity have been reprimanding them. What is this thing? This thing I quoted that Oded Shacham said, that Judge Oded Shacham said, that you're presenting a forest without trees? I'll translate for you. You're presenting a case because we say so without evidence. This is, and these people have been, I don't know how many millions of dollars, shekels they've invested in this, and the 25 brightest lawyers in the Attorney General's office, and this is the sloppy, unbelievably mechura. What do you say? It's full of holes like it's Swiss cheese. And this is the work that they did for 3 years now. They sat on this. It's just mind-boggling. And if the judges just throw it out, then this means, in terms of the reputation of the Attorney General, it will be horrendous. But I think the whole thing is going to be horrendous for them because, as El Segal, my friend and the great journalist here, investigative journalist, has said, the Attorney General have been the Praetorian Guard of the left in government here for many, many years, but they did enjoy a professional reputation. And then El Segal said this is going to be their undoing, because he said, when you try to hunt down Moby Dick, your ship also sinks. And this is what I think we're seeing here. They've tried to hunt Moby Dick because Netanyahu is not the material of other marginal ministers, and he also enjoys huge public support. So when Olmert was removed from office by these people, and it turned out rightly, although it started politically, I'm sure it started politically, but when he resigned, he had absolutely no support from the public.
Nope.
And Netanyahu, think of this, 4 rounds of elections, and about half the population votes to, if not directly to Netanyahu, to a coalition that Netanyahu is supposed to lead. So although he has 3 indictments hanging over his head, half the public does not believe that he's corrupt. They don't believe this. They think this is political persecution.
So I think that, having said that, and going back to politics, actual elective politics, as opposed to politics as practiced in Israel, which gives basically control over the political system to non-elected officials, and the media, I think we should talk about this unelected government that we have, this unelected prime minister that we have, this unsupported prime minister that we have, Naftali Bennett, and the people who are actually controlling him. And I mentioned too, I said the media, specifically the publisher of Yediot Achronot, which you guys can't really understand it, but just, I mean, it's sort of, I wouldn't even know what to compare him to in the United States. I mean, it's sort of like the, there was a book written about the American media. I don't know who it wrote it. Not Marvin Kalb. I have it here somewhere, but he was explaining that what is written in the New York Times every day becomes the headlines or the top stories in the primetime news on all the networks, so that they read the Times, and based on that, they put together their lineup of stories for their major national broadcasts in the evening. And it's the same thing with Yediot Achronot. Yediot Achronot is a tabloid paper, but he also owns shares in the television channel, the largest television channel in Israel. And basically, even though it's a terrible newspaper, it's totally distorted. It's impossibly biased against the right and towards the left and all the rest of it. I haven't read it in years. I simply can't look at it anymore. But it sets the agenda. So my paper, Israel Hayom, is the largest circulation paper in Israel, and it's also a good paper. But it doesn't set the agenda because the media ignores it. Anyway, so I said Noni Moses, the publisher, he's one of them. But inside of the government itself, and this is something that people don't understand. I wrote about it in my article in Newsweek that's going to be coming out later this week. You have a lot of pro-Israel Americans, American Jews, American non-Jews, just who support Israel, who look at this government and say, well, Carolyn, why are you hyperventilating? Gadi, what's your problem? Why can't you sleep at night? After all, Naftali Bennett is a man of the right. As Carolyn said, right, she ran with him for Knesset 2 years ago because, the platform, I wrote most of it. You know what I mean? It reflected very much my positions as somebody who is very clearly a conviction type of girl. That's what I care about. And so there was nothing in the platform or very little in the platform, put it that way, that I wouldn't have signed on my name, with no problem. And certainly the things that I didn't completely agree with were not voting issues for me. And yet, so if this is the guy, if this is what he was running on, what are you concerned about? Israel has a right-wing prime minister. Why is the right in mourning? Why is the left celebrating? And the answer is, aside from the fact that he's shown us just how, not even skin deep his convictions are, he's exfoliated his convictions, as he's become prime minister. He doesn't actually have any real power. They claim that this is a government that has parity between the left and the right, that no decisions can be made in the government without both sides agreeing to it. But there are a lot of things here that are not true, and all you have to do is look at the numerical breakdown of the coalition. And what you find is that you have ostensibly 20% of the coalition are comprised of members of right-wing parties. So Yamina, Naftali Bennett's faction, which has 6 seats because Amichai Shikli is still holding out and not joining the government, and Tikva Chadasha, New Hope, that's the disgruntled former Likud minister Gidon Saar's breakaway party from the Likud, that's comprised of angry former Likud members, and driven entirely by their hatred of Netanyahu. So they are ostensibly on the right, and they make up 20% of this 61 seat government. Then you have 75% of the members of this governing coalition are in parties on the left, and I include, by the way, Israel Beitenu in this because they are a left-wing party no matter what they say on all issues. So it's Israel Beitenu, it's blue and white, it's Yesh Atid that present themselves as center-left parties, and then you have the radical left parties, the Labor Party under Merav Michaeli and the Meretz Party. And then the last 5% of this coalition is an Arab Islamic party called RAM, or the United Arab List. And so what that means is that 80% of the members of this coalition are on the left or Islamists. All right. And so the idea that you have parity between the two sides is a joke. You have 20% right wingers in a left wing and radical left wing government. And the person who's responsible for those 80%, and actually you could include really Gideon Sa'ar's party in this too, so 90% of the members of this coalition, is Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid. And so Yair Lapid really he's going to be taking over, if this government survives, as Prime Minister in 2 years under their agreement. Naftali will rotate out and become Interior Minister, I think. And so this is the deal. And the idea that because Naftali is a man of the right doesn't have anything to worry about, it fails to take into account just the simple math related to this government. And that also brings you to another aspect of it, which is that, you don't need to bring most policies to the government for approval. Ministers have control over their ministries ostensibly, and the vast majority of the work of government does not require any votes. But in the event that they require it, and the votes are going to sort of be weighted to give the 20% of the government that's right wing equal say in things, all that means is that some of the more radical proposals by the left can be blocked when they get to a level that requires cabinet support. And by the way, all such initiatives by the 20% of right-wingers can also be blocked. So the best situation that you can hope for in this government is paralysis. But actually, the policies that are going to be advanced are very, very far to the left.
Because there's no such thing as paralysis. So what you will see is horse trading. So there will be deals when they say, we're talking about the appointment of judges, that the right will get to appoint one judge for every 4 the left gets to appoint. Because things will have to move, because government would have to work, because judges would need to be appointed. And this is true of everything. There's this one guy, he's a Twitterati. He belongs to the Twitterati class. Barak Cohen, a very vulgar leftist. And yesterday,
he's also a bully. I mean, he goes to people's houses and he's a thug. He bullies them.
And he bullies and he interrupts broadcasts of right-wing radio and television hosts. But he tweeted yesterday, Ayelet Shaked tweeted something that she will move to deport the illegal immigrants from Africa that have been an issue here in Israel, and it was one of her causes, and so he tweeted, it's a shame we can't bring this spice of the original Hebrew vulgarity. But what he said goes something like this: Ayelet, sweetie, I saw that you tweeted something about deporting the Mevakshei Miklat, the asylum seekers, which they don't need it's a leftist.
They're illegal aliens.
Euphemism. They're illegal aliens, right? So I wanted to tell you, he says, that we have enough fingers in the government in order to return you to the dark racist corner, dark racist deplorable corner from which you came. Tanuchi neshama. Carolyn, how would you translate that? Tanuchi neshama.
Oh, you sweetie, just relax.
Yeah, just relax, sweetie. So someone tweeted back, we don't understand. Yesterday you cheered her for joining the coalition. And he says, yeah, we celebrated the moment in which the idiotic fascist had turned into our puppet for a seat near the government table. So this is taking place on Twitter before the government is even formulated, which means they will take, Naftali and Ayelet and all this Yamina party who have deserted and moved to the and stole the vote for the left have nowhere to return to. And so this is why Naftali will have no power whatever. What can he do? He cannot. If he now dismantles this government and goes to election, he will be swept out. He doesn't even pass the threshold for entering the Knesset. So they've got it. He's a hostage. So it's not just a numerical balance between the factions. It's that he has nowhere to back to. There's only a precipice. You say precipice behind him?
A precipice.
Precipice
behind
him.
I mean, No, you're right. I just wanted to say where this is going. I mean, like, because we have another about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to devote it to what this all means for Israel, because it means certain very important things.
Do we have to talk about this?
Well, it's kind of important. It is our national survival and all that.
I guess it's Israelis survive many times by blocking things out. At good times we block out dangers, and Ben Gurion was amazingly brave when he declared independence in the face without an army, in the face of regular armies all around us. So you have to make this leap of faith, but now it's not a leap of faith. This is just it's a leap into the depressive abyss. I didn't tweet that, but I thought if these were biblical times, then I would say that God is not only punishing the people of Israel, he's doing it by mocking them, by humiliating them, with putting at the head of the government these two clowns, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, people whose words don't mean anything, people who are complete lightweights, who are Naftali Bennett wrote a book. This is just I'll give this example, and I'll pass the torch to you, because he wrote this book in the midst of the corona pandemic. It's called How to Defeat a Pandemic, and this is just a demonstration of the unbelievable divergence between what this guy thinks he can do and what he actually knows and can do, because he wrote this arrogant book and he was telling everyone what to do, and the Germans followed exactly this model. So where are the Germans now with their huge death rate, and where is Naftali? And he was going to write, his plan was to write to the prime minister's office on this issue, that the pandemic is the only thing that's important, and we'll put all the rest on hold, on the back burner. And now the pandemic is gone because we didn't listen to Naftali Bennett. We listened to Netanyahu, and now we defeated the pandemic. So he moved to saying, okay, now only economy matters. We have to get back to work. Only economy matters. Forget all the ideological stuff. And then he formed the government, and his party didn't take any of the economic portfolios. Nothing. Just nothing. It's just astounding how nothing has meaning in what these people say.
No, nothing. And by the way, the funny thing about his crappy plan for beating the pandemic and his economic plan, which he liked to call the Singapore plan, he plagiarized both of them from the strategic advisor who he didn't pay, and then he didn't give him credit for his work. And the guy is now threatening to sue Naftali, and he's demanding $250,000 shekels, which is about, I don't know, $75,000 in back payment for his work, which Naftali stole. So, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Not only does he not care about anything, but he stole the things that he claimed he cared about from somebody else who thought that he was going to get paid for his work. So, I mean, this guy's a complete charlatan and also a buffoon. But we do have to talk about it. By the way, just in regards to, he's got no exit plan. He's got no exit strategy from what he's done. Mai Golan, this Likud member of Knesset's young woman, she called Naftali and Gideon Sa'ar suicide bombers. And can you call them suicide bombers? But they're like kamikaze pilots, right? I mean, they don't have any way to get home. And that's why, part of the question of how long this government is going to last for is how many members of their factions are joined with them in this suicide pact. How committed are the members of their crappy factions that just turned their backs on everything that they claimed they stood for throughout their entire careers, right? And from childhood, really. How much are these jerks who are with them in the Knesset committed to dying along with them for this government that's going to do what? It's going to be pushing very, very far left-wing policies. So for instance, and just to go back for a second to the comparison to the last government, Naftali made the claim, his stake for legitimacy in stealing his voters' votes and forming this government that's completely dominated by the left, the far left, and this Islamist party that's holding on to them, that has them by the throat because they can leave any time that they don't get their way, because they don't care. It's no skin off their back. They have they have to figure out what they're going to do as a government policy. So Netanyahu's government, right, they had sort of parity between the right and the left, but most of the power of actual governing remained in Netanyahu's hands. So that, for instance, he was able to carry out diplomacy despite the fact that the foreign ministry was controlled by Gabi Ashkenazi from the Blue and White Party, which is a left-wing party. He was able to continue to maintain everything related to Iran, despite the agreement. So that the default position was that Netanyahu was steering the ship. Right here, it's the exact opposite. Because of the massive numerical superiority and the political power imbalance between Naftali and Yair Lapid is carrying out the day-to-day work of governance. And so here, I think, what's important is he gave his maiden speech to the foreign ministry yesterday, I believe it was, and he talked about the goals of his diplomacy. So he said, more or less that, just to sort of paraphrase what he said in so many words, look, if we want to have any leverage over the Americans, and the Biden administration is going back to the Iran nuclear deal, which is going to give Iran a nuclear arsenal within 9 years, guaranteed, with the legitimacy, with a good housekeeping seal of approval of the UN Security Council, right? So this is going to happen. And if we want to have any leverage, any influence whatsoever over them as they're enabling this existential threat to take form and also to take control over the entire Middle East with all the money that they're going to get from sanctions relief, we have to make concessions on the Palestinians. So what he's saying is, in order to have any influence, and of course he never measures what that influence is going to be, will the Biden administration reverse course on Iran if Israel agrees to sit down and negotiate whatever with the Palestinians? I doubt it. This is their policy and they're going forward with it. They don't care. So it's not even clear what influence he's talking about. What would Israeli influence do to the Biden administration? Because the entire policy has to be abandoned in order for the Biden administration to not endanger Israel's very existence, right? And so is he suggesting that somebody in the Biden administration, Blinken, Biden himself, anybody, Robert Malley, said to him, look, if you guys start having negotiations with the PLO, we're gonna actually, take action, military, economic, to bring down the regime, to end Iran's nuclear program? Of course not. There's absolutely no chance that happened, right? So he's offering us something in exchange for something else. He's making linkage, which is the thing that Netanyahu fought successfully, but fought ferociously for over 20 years to block. He's embracing linkage between the Palestinians and Iran towards the United States. And he's saying, we're going to make concessions on the Palestinians in the hope that they'll make concessions on Iran, but it's clear that they will make any concessions that they may make towards Israel are not going to have any impact on their overall policy, and their overall policy is horrible for Israel. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is, what's your policy on the Palestinians? They have, like I said, this is a very, very radical left-wing government on everything related to the Palestinians. You have people here who, support the boycott, sanctions, and divestment movement against Israel, which is an anti-Semitic movement. You have, and the U.S. State Department accepts that this is an anti-Semitic movement to demonize and to isolate and to turn into a pariah not only Israel, but anybody who does business with Israel. It's sort of a replacement of the Arab boycott with this boycott. It's the same thing, and the U.S. outlawed U.S. firms from participating in the Arab boycott in 1977. So here, you have laws on the book banning this, and you have members of the Israeli government who support it. You have Americans, again, who support Israel, and they look at this beautiful rainbow coalition that is the Israeli government with 9 women and 2 Arabs, and one of the women is black, and one of the women is wheelchair bound, and they say, look at this beautiful government, look at this multicultural government, look at all of this, look at all of that. But what they don't realize, and this, the fact that you have 2 Arabs, Elias Frej in the Meretz party, which is an anti-Zionist party or a post-Zionist party, and then you have Mansour Abbas, who's the head of the anti-Zionist Islamist party that we've discussed many times over the past several weeks. And I was thinking maybe we should see if they're friendly or not, and they've clearly come out of the closet. There's no doubt that they are a Muslim Brotherhood party. They are not friendly. But everybody says, see, his participation, the Ram, the Islamist party participation in the government, and Elias Frej as a minister in this government, that's going to prove to all of these AOC types, all of these Ilhan Omar types, that it's ridiculous to accuse Israel of being an apartheid regime. Except both Elias Frej and Mansour Abbas, who are walking, talking, living, breathing proof that Israel is not an apartheid state, accuse Israel of being an apartheid state. So, the whole thing is absurd. You cannot, reason somebody out of something that they weren't reasoned into. These people seek to demonize the Jewish state because they want to annihilate it. They don't care if it's true or not. They use the epithet apartheid or racist or whatever, not because it's true, but because it's effective. It's effective in securing their goal, which is to delegitimize the very existence of a Jewish state. And so the idea that any of these people who epitomize exactly what Israel has been fighting against all these years, and they are now government ministers in this government that's ostensibly run by an ostensible prime minister from the right. It's a lie on top of a lie on top of a lie, but all of these lies enable the advancement of an anti-Zionist policy, of suicidal foreign policies regarding both Iran and the Palestinians by this government, which again exists without the approval of the public, and in fact in the face of a very clear position stated by the voters at the ballot box in March. So, this is the abyss, right? And I think the only way to walk it back, to walk away from this abyss, is to think about how to bring down this government. And so maybe if we want to take the last couple of 2 minutes of our program to talk about a happy concept that maybe this horrible government won't last long. Do you want to give me some sense of what you think about that?
I can say that I completely understand why, though of course I do not approve of their idea to freeze legislation for now, because whenever this government is going to move on anything, we will discover that it's an impossible amalgamation of the extreme left and the extreme right in some aspects, and it just cannot work. So I think there are even Naftali Bennett and his minions are not going to be able to swallow everything that Mansour Abbas or Merav Michaeli want. Or there can be frictions on the left side of this government too, because Mansour Abbas is not exactly supportive of the gay pride parades. So many frictions lie ahead, and I think it's going to be paralyzed. So the question is, will this government meet any challenge? Because if it meets any serious challenge, then I don't think it can survive it.
I think you may or may not. I'd like to believe you're right, and I think there's one thing that leads me to think you are, and there's one thing that leads me to think that you're not. So first, the thing that makes me, because I want to end on a happy note. So the thing that leads me to think that you're wrong is that in 2006, Hezbollah, first Gaza, the Hamas attacked us from Gaza. They attacked a tank crew that was on the border, on the Israeli side of the border with Gaza. They killed 3 of the soldiers, and they kidnapped another one named Gilad Shalit, and they brought him to Gaza, and they started attacking Israel with missiles. And then about 10 days into this exchange of fire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah opened attacks against Israel in the north in what later became known as the Second Lebanon War. And the prime minister at the time, Ehud Olmert, the chief of staff at the time, Dan Chalutz, and the defense minister at that time, Amir Peretz, as well as the foreign minister at that time, Tzipi Livni, were the most incompetent leaders Israel has ever had in time of war of any sort. They incompetently led the forces to battle. They gave them terrible instructions. They had no clear operational goals from the military perspective. They had no clear strategic goals from the perspective of the government. Tzipi Livni nearly gave Hezbollah veto power over Israeli actions in Lebanon because she was that stupid in working with Condoleezza Rice at the time in the UN Security Council. I mean, it was a complete and utter disaster. So after the war ended, at great cost to the country, there was a mass public outcry against these leaders, and specifically three of them, Olmert, Chalutz, and Peretz, demanding that they resign and demanding new elections. And it seemed at the time that it was very likely that the public pressure, which was overwhelming, was going to lead to new elections. But you had the media swoop in, Raviv Drucker, who you've mentioned, who's a major propagandist, an extremely powerful voice on the left, and Eliezer Shraga, who's the head of the Israel Democracy Institute, which has its names, Eliad Shraga, which, as the name suggests, is a Stalinist organization. And so they managed to instead deflect public attention or demand for elections to fake public demand for a commission of inquiry into the war. Nobody cared. Everybody knew what happened. We saw it all. We experienced it all. We didn't need experts to tell us what happened and where responsibility lay. It was obvious from watching the news every day or from running to shelters if you lived anywhere near the north of the country, or you were the parents of soldiers who were killed. Everybody knew exactly what had happened, and nobody cared. And they were able to deflect that into this commission of inquiry, which ended up lasting for 2 years before it ended. So that didn't do anything. Olmert remained in power, unapologetic for what he had done. Today, he claims that the Second Lebanon War was the greatest military victory in Israeli history, and he says it with a straight face. And he wrote about it in his idiotic book that he wrote from prison. And so that's one thing. And then on the other hand, the good thing, and the reason why I do have some hope, is that the head of the opposition is none other than Benjamin Netanyahu. And, I think he is obviously not only the most popular politician in Israel, he's also extremely competent. And the opposition that he leads has 52 members, and they are very angry, and they are very dedicated to bringing down this government. So I think that to the extent that anybody would be in a position to place just sort of impossible pressure on members of this government to run away or for the government to crumple into itself, I think that we do have the best leader of the opposition for that role. But it's anybody's guess how long this thing lasts and how much damage they're going to be able to accomplish before they're gone. So that's our happy note, right?
Yeah, I have another happy note. At least there'll be a lot of laughs. It's so ridiculous and so grotesque that it'll also be funny, if you're inclined to black humor, that is.
Well, if it's dark humor, you just have to make sure that you don't give me too many jokes before I'm supposed to fall asleep, because I gotta get to sleep, man. I just gotta get to sleep.
I don't remember being so depressed since being on the left. Then Netanyahu was elected in 1996. And just goes to show.
I was skipping through the halls of the defense ministry. I was in the army at the time, and his slogan was with a friend of mine, and everybody was in mourning. It was like they were sitting Shiva because Netanyahu had just beaten their Lord and Master Shimon Peres. And so we were skipping literally through the hallway of the defense ministry, myself and a colleague of mine, singing Netanyahu's campaign jingle, Netanyahu, Osim Shalom Batuach. Oh, we're going to make peace, but it's going to be safe, So we're dancing through the hallways, singing it, and everybody.
But this is just to say that the wheel keeps turning, and
one day you're up, the next day you're down.
2,000 years you're in exile, and then the next day you have Zionism. So Don't despair yet. We have thousands of years ahead.
Anyway, I lost my earpiece, so that probably is a sense that's like the final thing that we have to say. Okay, Carolyn's lost her earphone, so we're gonna just tell you all subscribe to our channels on
That's
Rumble.
exactly what I said.
Oh, you just said it,
no,
and I didn't hear you.
No, I didn't. But I'll add that don't forget to press the little bell button, because then you get push notifications.
Yeah,
It was a
that's
pleasure.
important.
At least we find some solace in this discussion, which at least you vent some.
Yeah, and ventilate. And knowledge is power. Don't forget that, guys. If we want to win this battle in the war of ideas, then we need to keep informed. So Gadi and I will be back next week, and hopefully we'll have better news. And if we don't, we'll at least explain why we're so sad in what I hope is both illuminating and not utterly miserable way. So we'll talk to you next week.
Real Jews, unlike woke people, never lose their sense of humor and never think there is something you shouldn't be laughing about.
Well, look, you're talking to the mother of the only right-wing satire program Israel has ever seen, and we were the funniest program ever.
It was a pleasure.
All right, we'll talk to you next week. Bye, guys.